that the previous government sort of turned it into this neoliberal economic sort of a defect. It made it out to be that Georgia was not supposed to be this agricultural country and was supposed to be industrialized. And you heard things, from Mr. Friedman, Milton Friedman's philosophy on economics, to Margaret Thatcher, to having a small statue built for Ronald Reagan. So you had this neoliberal economic religion sort of imported into Georgia and spread all throughout the society, where everything was being sold off, all these strategic economic assets that Georgia had, back to Russia, to the chagrin and shock of even folks in Washington. And it was all done under the banner of, look, we're privatizing everything, and why should there be a government bureaucracy? And so libertarianism was the big word, and Ayn Rand was, advocated in every facet of educational system. So it was basically madness. It was, I don't even want to call it shock therapy. I don't know what it was. It was just a blatant sort of great attempt to brainwash it, to reinvent the New Georgian, really. And today, this government, needs to get credit where it deserves some credit, because they managed to inherit Saakashvili's Georgia. And I always mention this, Saakashvili's regime did implement some serious reforms, some much needed reforms. But then after, say, 2005-06, it really lost its head. And it just basically turned the country into its own personal torture dungeon, while being called, the beacon of liberty. We all recall Bush's visit in Tbilisi, I think it was 2005. And there I constantly sort of, remember what he said when he compared the shift, the winds of freedom that were blowing out of Iraq to Georgia. So the whole obsession with Iraq sort of had to obviously, sort of be justified, and this justification was Georgia. And everything that Saakashvili did, the good, the bad, and the ugly, was presented basically in Washington, and it stopped within the state walls of the State Department, never reaching the White House, because George W. Bush despised Putin, and Misha, as he was known, was his golden boy, basically. And there is plenty of literature about this now that actually proves this dynamic of their relationship. And it's openly being discussed and available. And so that's how basically Saakashvili's regime lasted between, from 2003 till 2012. And what we are seeing now is basically decoupling of regional realities from that whole, rhetoric and propaganda and narratives that have basically been shaped by neoconservative and neoliberal concert in Washington. It hasn't happened just in Georgia, but basically the entire world. But Georgia, so there's this whole decoupling that's happening, where the reality is rearing its ugly head, meaning Georgia has to sort of return back to the regional geopolitics and regional reality. There's just no other choice, really. And I think behind this wave of hysteria, I don't know what other word to use for it, that comes out of Western capitals, there is not much to depend on for Westerners. I think for folks in Washington, foreign policy in Washington, those who actually look at Georgia. So I think this is a very peculiar situation where sort of the truth has come back. Georgia has to develop this sort of introspective foreign policy that focuses on its neighborhood just to survive as a state. And then we have this sort of obsessive, dogmatic, narrative that talks about, continuously about its values, as if Georgia needs to be taught, about there is some sort of a fundamental absence of Western values in Georgia, and somehow by sort of shoving it down their throats, they will make it a better society, which Georgians really need.
Yeah.
But so it's this very illogical process in which, in my opinion, the West finds itself in the region.
And it was